Well, thank you all for sticking around. This is going to be a very interesting and semi-depressing panel, at least my portion of it. So I'm a shareholder at Vedder Price. Vedder Price is a law firm. We're the largest commercial transaction law firm in the world, and that's all we do. There's 80 of us to do this stuff, and so we live and die this stuff. Al gave me a choice between tariffs and making COVID great again, and I picked tariffs because it's less depressing. So tariffs, it's interesting. If you look, never in the history of the world has one person been able to affect, I shouldn't say never, few times in the history of the world has one person been able to affect everybody in the world with such impact. And let that sink in, because tariffs affects every one of us right now. And it happened virtually overnight. And so when people do things, believe them and understand there's consequences. And so in the next 15 or so minutes, I'm going to talk about the consequences. And just listening to some of the panels yesterday and today, I think it's really important for folks to understand how these tariffs impact you, particularly people who do transactions. Clicker? Do we have a clicker? It's not working, man. So, oh wow, that's small. So I'm just going to go through some of the legal backgrounds and the authority and what these tariffs are. When you hear all these different terms, you understand what they are. It's just kind of a roadmap. So the big three authorities, or the alleged authorities, that the administration is using to impose the tariffs, the first one's called IEEPA. That's the Emergency Emergency, see, I can't even say this. International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So it's much easier to say IEEPA. And that's all national security. And that's the big one. And that's the one where you can basically say whatever is national security is whatever I say it is. So that's IEEPA. Section 232, that's national security, but it's more targeted to specific industries. Steel, they just made it smaller, come on. Steel and aluminum, copper. And then Section 301, that deals with trade practices. And that is primarily the administration's targeting China on that one. Better. The screen's going up and down on my end, so, but this is good. So the key dates was commonly referred to as April 2nd, Liberation Day. That's when the stock market crashed temporarily. If you bought when it was down, you may not like a bandit the next day when it went back up. And that declared a baseline tariff of 10% on every country in the world, baseline tariff of 10%. And then you had the other tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs based in large part on trade imbalances or trade deficits. All that went into effect April 5th. And then you had other executive orders, folks that try to buy Venezuelan oil, Russian oil. India's getting whacked now with an extra 25% tariff. That means it's now 50% tariff on Indian goods. And that was one of our best trading partners. So the fiscal impact. So why do these tariffs make sense? Why do them? So it's still all about the money, in large part. Federal tariff revenue to date, or at least of August, $165 billion. $165 billion. Projected revenue between now and 2035, $2.9 trillion. The big numbers with a T, trillion. The average tariff rate went from 2 to 3% up to 9 to 10%. The growth of the American GDP is probably going to drop about 1% as a result of the tariffs. Long-run output in the United States will drop roughly 6%. We just don't know. We've never been in this situation where all of these things are happening at the same time. It's like a hailstorm. So globally, you can see what the impact is. It's getting everybody. The darker colors are the highest tariff rates: Brazil, China, India. So India, again, they got the double tariff because of they're buying Russian oil. Brazil, they're getting 50% tariff because of Bolsonaro, their former president, was convicted and under national security concerns. So aviation impact and uncertainties, and we're living it right now, frankly. We'll see how this plays out. I wish I knew what's going to happen, but again, it impacts everybody. There have been trade agreements, zero for zero. The UK, Japan, and the UK, that's great. Goes back to the 1979 agreement that we had in place over civil aviation. Basically, aircraft parts are traded between the US, Japan, and the UK, zero rate. So we're basically going back to where we were. However, the steel and aluminum tariffs are still there. So it's great you're not paying any tariffs on the finished product, but the manufacturers and suppliers are paying tariffs on the stuff to make the finished product. So we're also having currently, as we speak, we're involved in a Section 232 investigation on commercial aircraft, jets, and parts. And then that may lead to new tariffs on national security justification for cost. And one of the things that the administration focused on is during COVID, when we realized we don't have supplies. If they shut down the supply chains, as was the case in a lot of medical supplies during COVID, what are we going to do? And so that's why they're using 232 as a tool to investigate whether there's justification to go forward with tariffs, roll back the zero for zero. And then you have trade and delivery disruptions. The folks at the OEMs, the MROs, suppliers, all raised concerns about delayed and deferred deliveries. I've been involved in several of them. My first response is when I represent clients, we're not paying the tariffs. We're just not going to do it. And then we go to a plan B. You always got to try to find a plan B if you can. You swap deliveries out. We waited till the tariffs went into effect, or tariffs were taken away for zero. We took later positions. I don't have a client that hasn't paid a tariff yet, but deals are going to get canceled. They're just going to get canceled because we just don't know, and it changes from day to day. Other impacts, here's a classic one. Swiss, the Pilatus, severely impacted. August 7th, the U.S. imposed a 39% tariff on all Swiss goods, including the PC-12 and 24. August 8th, the very next day, Pilatus said, no, we're halting deliveries. Think about it. That's 40% of its market. Does anybody know anybody at Pilatus right now? Yeah. How are they feeling? Not good, right? Yeah. Well, you got to find other ways to adapt. And I think if you can adapt, you're going to be fine. And that goes to one of my other points here we'll get to. So Canadian, Mexican, non-USC compliant aircraft, engines, parts, they're subject to a 25% tariff. And what's interesting about that, and I tell people, just because it's Bombardier, you don't get a pass. You need to review whether the aircraft was exported from the USMCA customs control or substantially reformed. And so some of the stuff I've heard in the last day and a half is interesting, I'll say that. And I'll get to that. So Brazil and aviation aerospace are still subject to a 10% tariff. So you're buying a $20 million Embraer. Are you going to pay an extra $2 million for it? You have to ask yourself. I get clients that say, no, I'm not going to do it. Again, the nominal rate for Brazil is 50% under IEPA. Other aviation impact uncertainties. Suppliers. I mean, we're living it. I mean, we're in the industry. Aircraft suppliers rely on importing spare parts, tools, materials. Tariffs raise the cost of imports, lead times, certifications, bottlenecks, all this stuff. Increased maintenance cost. Possibly delays in maintenance. MROs mean to stock more inventory. When you stock more inventory, that's less capital for other investments. It's hard to do CapEx. Inventory is not CapEx. You got to have buffers against delays, all of this stuff. And as owners and operators, it's not acceptable. You got to figure out a way to adapt. MOs are passing on the cost to customers. I got a call saying, I got an extra bill for $300,000 from an MRO. It was line item tariffs. It's like, read the contract. they can pass those on. So if you're going to put a plane in RMO, ask them what their tariff policy is before you do it so you don't get shocked. International trade-off, retaliation, and effects. So retaliation by our key trading partners, China and EU, it's happening right now. We're living it. Swiss exports to the US are down over 20%. Trade diversion to untariffed countries. One of the things that scared a lot of folks is seeing what happened in Beijing with India, China, and Brazil all shaking hands, and you kind of feel like you're the kid who got left out of the party, right? You do what makes sense. What the U.S. is looking at is, look, U.S. investments are being pumped into the U.S. I mean, foreign direct investment, you get supplier capacity. Reshoring a lot of stuff. Is it going to accelerate? Yeah, I mean, you're going to have people starting building the U.S. Pilatus is talking about it. But establishing supply chains take time. I mean, we all know this. It takes time. You can't build a factory in the United States overnight. It's going to take years. And meeting the certification requirements is very difficult. You have the FAA. The government just shut down at noon. Good luck with that one. But Pilatus is exploring U.S. manufacturing right now. Will Embraer expand its U.S. manufacturing? Will they start doing the 500 and 600 in the U.S.? We got them on 3.5 years, so, I don't know. I suspect they will. So legal challenges. So the federal courts have ruled that some of the IEEPA-based tariffs are illegal. In fact, 2 courts have. We went to the trade court and to the appellate court. They both said it were legal. But, as I said earlier, you still got 232, and you got the 301 tariffs. Those aren't challenges. This is IEEPA, just national security. Stacking tariffs, that raises the fairness question. Is it fair that India gets whacked twice for buying oil and for reciprocal tariffs? And the Supreme Court's looking at this literally next month, about the same time, just before CJI Miami. So there's going to be some interesting discussions. So let's say the Supreme Court says, yeah, they're illegal. Go to Plan B. Then the question becomes, how do you refund $300 billion and to whom? Like I bought $100 worth of stuff on Amazon last week. Do I get $30 back? I mean, if I bought Chinese product, do I get $30 back? I'm going to ask for it. Exception and delays create uncertainty for businesses trying to plan. It just does. And then the question becomes, what happens in 2026? November 2026, we're up for elections. History has shown that the party that isn't in power typically wins the House of Representatives in big numbers. If the House is taken back over by the Democrats, that's going to stop a lot of the ability for the president. You'll probably see hearings, you'll probably see impeachments, who knows? But that's going to make life very uncomfortable for a lot of folks in the U.S. And then 2028, what happens if a new president comes in and changes everything? So you're in the middle of building a manufacturing plant in the United States. Do you keep doing it when you know that the president may change? I don't know. Those are all things to consider and all challenges and uncertainties that the industry faces. Oh, wrong button. Nope, that's it. It's like I said, it's an interesting time. And I think I have a Slido question we can put up that'll kind of put it in reality to what, how it impacts us. I think we do. Do we have that Slido question? Hopefully. Yep. Do we get, no? It's up there. Oh, no, that's not the Slido question, but I'll read it anyway. You mentioned that tariffs on Embraer aircraft currently delivered in the U.S., are those currently absorbed by Embraer? I don't know. That's a Mafaltano question. I think he'll tell you. What's happening now is, I think, a lot of the manufacturers, at least in other areas, a lot of the manufacturers are absorbing the tariffs because from a very Machiavellian perspective, it's eliminating the people that can't absorb the tariffs. So it's consolidation. So a lot of small businesses are going out, while Walmart and the bigger players are still doing pretty well. They'll survive this. Big players will always survive. The big, strong always survive. This is purely Darwinism at its finest. So is the 10% price increase we just saw from the U.S. major vendor citing tariffs, despite production being in the U.S., they just made an arbitrary opportunity raise? No, I mean, so here's the thing. It's impacting everybody. So every U.S. manufacturer is dealing with tariffs. If you have any raw materials, you're facing tariffs. And if you look at what happened during Trump 1 with washing machines, when they increased the tariffs on washing machines, it really hammered LG and Samsung. What did Whirlpool do? The only manufacturer of washing machines in the United States, they increased their tariffs, their prices just below the tariff prices. Now, they had a great year, but the number of employees that were increased because of the increased manufacturing cost U.S. consumers approximately $833,000 per job. So that was the net impact of tariffs. So, I don't know. I'm not an economist. I'm just a lawyer. I look at the facts and assess risk. And that's one of the things that we have to think about in this. And to figure out how we're going to adapt as an industry to deal with this, because it's certainly not going to go away anytime soon. Okay? One more or no? Do we have the Slido or no? We're working on it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Is if an aircraft goes for cabin completion in Europe and comes back to the US or comes in the US, what would be would that be any impact on the tariff for the cabin completion? That can be quite...
Yeah, it depends in large part on whether it was substantially transformed.
Yes.
And it depends on, you have to talk to the manufacturer and work with the customs folks to see whether or not whatever happened constitutes just substantial transformation. The completions that Dassault do in the United States is not substantial.
The large cabin is quite substantial because essentially that's the cabin, right?
I mean, well, the Falcons come in green. And so, and they still get whacked with tariffs when they come in. So I would say talk to a trade attorney and talk to, you can talk to, they can talk to the customs people and ask them the question. Obviously, no one wants to pay a tariff, but the risk of not paying a tariff is pretty significant. And I did have a question up there, or you don't have a comment? No? All right.
I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I have many for you, actually, but
yeah.
I thought that's my last one. I was wondering, is there any setup that we can recommend to our American clients to, go around that tariff, at least for the 2 years, a setup with a Cayman?
Any setup? Yeah, I mean, so...
Another registry where you are allowed to fly out your aircraft every, I don't know, X number of days.
Yeah, no, that's... I'll quick answer your question. That's a nice dovetail into what Paul's going to say. So my recommendation is don't avoid tariffs, because I'll give you just an example. If you take and I heard some of this talk yesterday, talk about importing an aircraft from Asia to the United States, a Bombardier. Bombardier is exempt under the USMCA, and if it's coming in from a USMCA country, US, Mexico, Canada, it's zero tariff under the USMCA. Unless it's been transshipped. If it's been operated outside the USMCA, like Singapore, Australia, what have you, and you bring it back in, it's subject to a 25% tariff. What happens if you don't pay that tariff? Then you're whacked with fines and penalties. So the tariff, the fines, if you're negligent, is twice the tariff rate. So take a $20 million plane, 25% of that, $5 million, $5 million, you're going to pay a $10 million fine on a $20 million plane if you don't pay the tariff. Think about that. I mean, you hear that, your immediate reaction, like you want to projectile vomit. it's crazy. So that's the thing. It never, there we go. Potential negligence, yeah, negligently failed to pay the tariff on an import of a 200 mile, yeah. Okay, well, 100%. It's not 5 million. It's not zero. It's yeah, it is 5 million. No, yeah, that's right. If it's grossly negligent, so now that everybody's attended this meeting or this conference, you know about it. So now you can't say it's just negligence. It's now gross negligence because you knew about it. Now it's $10 million. So think about that. So that's all I'm going to say. I know we have drinks later, and we'll need them now, right? I'm going to pass this on to Paul for this U.S. bonus depreciation. And he has much better graphics than I do.
Presentation. And I think, I was telling some people before this session that really this is one of the most valuable sessions. There's been great sessions all throughout the conference, but there's a lot of value to be extracted here. And what I can tell you, certainly listening to David speak, is a lot of people, including some attorneys in the region, just get the tariffs really dangerously wrong. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. And so this is another area of which there's a lot of misunderstanding, not just in this region, but I would say globally. And that's what is, U.S. Bonus depreciation and kind of how it works. And so we're very much talking in the U.S. context during this session, both in tariffs and in terms of bonus depreciation. But at the end of my presentation, I will also show you how it can be directly relevant to Asian owners in some instances. And I can say that from experience. But we're, the two of us here are very much in the U.S. context at the moment. Thankfully, we're not in the U.S. right now because, if you got two brown guys on stage, somebody's going to go call Ice Baby. Okay, so look, first of all, what is it, right? So I just like with the export credit one, I want to start by talking about dispelling some myths about bonus depreciation, and the easiest way to do that is what it's not. So I'm not going to, the speaking points are behind you. I'm not going to read them, but I'll elaborate on kind of each one. So first, what I tell my customers is if you're not planning to buy an aircraft, then bonus depreciation should not change anything for you. Okay, and so rather it's something that you should take advantage of if you're already planning on buying an aircraft. Now, in terms of windfall, as we'll see a little bit later, bonus depreciation is something that allows you to offset taxable income. So just remember the word offset. It's also the name of a very prominent American rapper. He's married to Cardi B. There will be a test on this later. If you don't have sufficient income in that particular year, then the offset doesn't really change anything for you. So it doesn't really make sense to pursue bonus depreciation. Next, it's not an easy way to sneak in personal use. So don't count on being able to fit in personal use anytime. It's very much for business use. And in the U.S. context, business use, and particularly in the U.S. tax context, business use is quite complex, and it can only be altered quite slightly to fit sort of personal use. But then there's always a risk, especially in the first year. And this takes you to the next point, which is bonus depreciation is not a one-year undertaking. So there's a lot to do after the first year, but we're going to talk about a little bit later. The first year is sort of all important. And again, it comes back to business use. It's never a one-dimensional analysis. It's always complex and there's moving parts, and you always need good tax advisors, you always need good counsel. And bonus depreciation in its current form, despite the sort of generic articles that are kind of written on it by non-industry media, it's much more complex than it appears. And then finally, it's not a be-all and end-all. Sometimes there are other options that make sense, including with the ownership options. Bonus depreciation is not some kind of a holy grail for customers that have substantial U.S. taxable income. And even in that case, there can be other ownership structuring options, which can be more advantageous. Now, finally, it's not just for U.S. entity and U.S. national UBOs. Just keep that in mind. I thought it's important to mention it here, and I will get to this point at the end as well. So it's international companies, international UBOs, if they have a U.S. entity or a U.S. subsidiary that pays U.S. federal income tax, they can claim this deduction. And there's a lot of smart human tricks here, and it's a great way to endear yourself to some clients is to save them tens of millions of dollars. So a little bit of the history and background in terms of what it is. Bonus depreciation, who knows what bonus depreciation is before I kind of give the, okay, a few. Bonus depreciation, it allows you to immediately deduct a large percentage of the aircraft purchase price from your U.S. taxable income for that first year versus, evenly over multiple years. So ordinarily, an asset like an aircraft will depreciate evenly over a number of years. Normally it's 6 years if it's predominantly used in your business, or 12 years if it's predominantly used for charter. And under this type of scenario, so just to kind of, there's no such thing as a free lunch and there's no such thing as a free aircraft. So just to explain this, let's just say, let's keep our life simple. So we'll talk about secondary market aircraft or even some new aircraft. $12 million purchase price, okay? $12 million purchase price, that will be normally spread out evenly in terms of tax deductions, so that the annual tax deductions for that owner would normally be $2 million a year over 6 years, right? Simple math, or $1 million over 12 years. Bonus depreciation in its current form under the big beautiful bill lets you deduct $12 million at one go for your first year, but only if you do everything correctly. So we're going to talk about that. And what it essentially is, just like what David was saying in terms of, why we have tariffs, there is always some logic somewhere. Bonus depreciation in its current form is really meant as an economic stimulus, and it is therefore really bipartisan. Obviously, it's a certain class of people and voters and interest in the U.S. that it benefits. I won't get into this, but it applies across different types of assets as well. We're only talking about aircraft here, but it can apply to things like Chevy Suburbans and things like that. But it was first introduced not under Trump. It was first introduced in 2002. It was at 30%. It's varied some years to other years, but at that point it was 30% over mostly new aircraft. And I guess if you, let me see, yeah, if you, where to go? Okay, so let me see my slides. Okay, so in terms of the its kind of requirements, if you've got, it has to be less than 25% of the total hours must be unrelated party business use. So just keep that in mind. So you have to keep that to less than 25%. So unrelated party business use, charter, third-party leases. So Part A requires that effectively more than 25% of the total hours must be used for unrelated party use. And that phrase, unrelated party use, is the true definition of qualified business use for the IRS purposes. So qualified business use basically means unrelated party business use. Then once sort of A is met, then requirement B is combined business use, i.e. unrelated party business use plus related party business use for owners or significant shareholders or related parties. That part of it must exceed 50%. This requirement is for bonus depreciation to kick in at all. So you want to reach effectively 100% business use to get 100% bonus depreciation. So as I sort of mentioned, the business use in excess of 50% is just for bonus depreciation to kind of kick in at all. But if you want to get it to 100, you gotta get the use to 100. So if you have 51% business use in your first year, then you will get what percent bonus depreciation? If you use 51%, what percent bonus depreciation? Where are we? Yeah, so 51%, sorry about that. I can't see quite there. So if you have 51% bonus depreciation, then 51% business use, you get 51% bonus depreciation. And so what is business use? That's the sort of art and science. So business use, for our purposes here, just think of it as strictly business flights. So it's important to emphasize that business use means, again, strictly business flights. And sometimes it gets down to a passenger by passenger, flight by flight analysis. So if the spouse of an executive comes along, then let's say you've got the executive and the spouse, and those are the only two passengers. If the spouse of the executive comes along, then those hours only apply for 50% business use, and which will basically wreck your first year analysis. And then separate to that, there is a leg-by-leg analysis. So, if the aircraft picks you up from the city where your office or an office of your client's company is based, and it flies you to the business meeting in another location, and then kind of, drops you off halfway at a halfway point somewhere along a straight line, then it's much more difficult to kind of do that. Analysis correctly. Looking at the time, just in terms of, more to be considered. So I tell people, it's all about documentation. So documentation. Everything from receipts to board minutes, just all has to be carefully documented and submitted. And again, to begin with, you have to have income to offset, right? And the income to offset, it's the right sort of offset for the right sort of income. So like passive deductions for passive income, basically. There's three types of income, and there's three types of deductions. One is passive portfolio income, that's investment income. And then the second is passive income, portfolio investments, and then the third is active. And active income is basically your income from wages, salaries, et cetera. So depending on the use that qualifies for bonus depreciation, your offsets are gonna be some kind of a mixture of these three, but one type of deduction can only offset one type of corresponding income, in long and short. So let me see. Okay, I can carry on, but I actually want to leave some time for questions. This is the most important point I want to make, is that the international dimension for all of this. Bonus depreciation, as I said, is a U.S. tax concept, but it has ramifications in international companies and for international UBOs with U.S. interests as well. So if a foreign UBO, whether it's an individual or a company, owns a U.S. entity, or in the case of a foreign company, if they have a U.S. subsidiary, that entity or subsidiary is the entity or subsidiary that can claim bonus depreciation as well for, again, substantial U.S. tax savings. Now, in all of this, especially in the international context, the early planning is actually more important in the international context, especially if you're looking at the 50% minimum use and you're targeting it to be 50% business use in the US, again, in order to qualify for bonus depreciation at all. So more broadly, bonus depreciation itself is really been a huge boon in the industry and is driving an uptick in activity, particularly in the US domestic market. But again, whether it's an American seller or an international buyer type of fact pattern or vice versa, it's something that should be tabled early in the considerations of the decision to either, specifically of the decision to acquire an aircraft, but when you get to this time of year, it's also forms part of the, can inform a decision to sell an aircraft, particularly if there's a market for that aircraft in the US. And, bonus depreciation this year is really the reason why, if you're signing a deal this year on a Gulfstream or Bombardier aircraft and you're hoping to close, if you sign an LOI now and you're hoping to close by the end of the year with a PPI slot in the US, it's not going to happen. It can still happen for some, Cessna and other aircraft, but that kind of gives you a good example of why and how it's led to such a big boon in the U.S. domestic market in particular. Now, I did want to leave 4 minutes for questions, and I've got exactly 4 minutes left for questions. So let's, it can be questions for both of us as well. So, yeah.
Hi, thanks a lot, Paul. That was very interesting. And as you know, we finance a lot of private clients. Now, does that mean that they have to register the plane under Part 135?
It does. So
commercially, because I mean, like Part 91 would possibly not work, right?
But by its nature, it can't work for the business use. There can be very sort of limited exceptions. Yeah. So, like strictly, the answer is not they must. Generally, they do and they should.
So you can do 91 as well. It's just what matters is what Paul said. It's qualified business use or not qualified business use. So if a 91 operator, like a corporation, operates under 91, as long as it's qualified business use, what gets you in trouble is the personal use.
Yeah, I thought it applies for business or for charter. That's why my question.
Yeah, well, certainly for the charter element, it's non-negotiable. But for exactly what I said, often, and I don't deal with a lot of corporate flight departments. You may. Under that context, it would be, because by its very nature, it would almost always be business use if it's a corporate owned, except if the CEO flies his family and friends around, and then that's where the meticulous documentation comes in. And then when you do get audited, it's a pretty brutal affair for the flight department.
Okay, thanks.
Very important topics for us, especially because we are in aircraft sales. So I have 2 questions actually for you. Number one is, does the bonus depreciation apply when an aircraft is financed?
Yeah, it can certainly apply in the case of financed aircraft. I mean, I guess there are certain structures under some of the operating lease products that may need to be kind of refined a bit to allow for sublease treatment at least. But again, it's making sure that you're backwardly defendable for all of this. So if there is an audit, they're very extensive. So documentation is crucial. And when the aircraft is financed, they look at the finance documentation as well. They'll look at the structure, and they're looking at an excuse to kind of hit you on not having the correct entity trying to avail itself of any depreciation, and especially if it's accelerated depreciation.
Thank you. And my second question is, as you know, most of the U.S. transactions were rushing for year-end, and some transactions we managed to close by year-end, before year-end, have the aircraft unregistered. But I hear sometimes that to qualify, you also need to have the first flight with the UBO to qualify. So it's not only just a matter of transfer of ownership and registration, but this flight is important on that same year. Is this correct?
It's called placed in service obligation or regulation, or it's yes. And I recommend clients have at least 2 flights, because if one flight's a silly flight, the IRS will disregard it.
David, it doesn't have to be the UBO on it, though, does it? If you had like a board member or someone.
It has to be, again, a business flight. So, don't fly to Cabo, don't go to Vegas, go somewhere that's boring and you actually have to do some business. Take notes, take people that are legitimate. Don't take your kids and go to Yosemite.
Or you just buy a taco stall in Cabo, and then it's fine.
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
Why tacos, Al? Why?
'Cause we're in
Why
carbo.
tacos, because we're brown?
We're in carbo.
so-
And I think on that note, we're going to break for.
No, some good questions.
Can you answer in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, the most helpful one, I think, is the party is only 60%. I think just, keep in mind that the requirement for bonus depreciation to kick in at all is is 50%. You want to reach 100% combined business use to get 100% bonus depreciation. You don't have to, and again, it kicks in at 50%. So it just depends on your tax planning with ideally your CFAs or your corporate tax department or your tax lawyers.
Those two Slido questions,
That's all.
correct, yes. And Cayman, yes. It's about the import.
You mentioned. Oh, sorry. You mentioned ongoing requirements related to bonus depreciation. I 100%. But what happens if you claim in the first year and then sell in the second year? If depends the type of entity, depends its type of business, and if it becomes apparent that its business of the entity which claimed the depreciation is aircraft trading, then there is some form of clawback, effectively.
It's an ugly term called recapture.
Yeah, that's it.
So you have to unwind the deal, and basically you're only going to take advantage of, if it's Part 91, 1 year, it's 135, 1/7, and you have to recapture. So you give the tax money back.
Recapture.
Thank you.
Hey.